Welcome everyone. Welcome to Climate Hub Davos and to our session about meaningful climate communications, how to get the narrative right. We will have a session of 2 parts. First, I'm really excited to have here with me Dr. Sweta Chakraborty from We Don't Have Time, our media partner. And then later there's a second part with other partners on climate storytelling. Good. Let's get started, Sweta.
Yes, please. I'm excited.
It's been an intensive week, but how are you feeling after 4 days of Davos?
I think I'm lucky that this is happening on the last day because I've heard so much and I have an opportunity to kind of just, take it all in, listen, and then it gives me the chance to summarize it at the end. It's been intense. There's a lot going on. There's noticeable people that are here. There's people that are missing. That's also very noticeable. And Davos is really a microcosm of what's happening in geopolitics around the world. And so many interconnected events around geopolitics, like the planet warming and how that actually leads to some of the conflicts that are being discussed on the main stage. So it's been interesting to me how, despite the fact that the source of so much of what's being discussed is climate, but ultimately climate is less on the agenda this year than I've seen in previous years. So all of this has been very fascinating.
Perfect. And let's come back to the agenda and what kind of role does climate play in that conversation. But first, a rather personal question. You are a behavioral scientist. You have PhD in behavioral sciences. What is one climate behavior that you struggle with? We all have one. For me personally, it's business-related travel and the emissions related to that.
You just took mine now. So what am I supposed to say? No, okay, so it's the reason I'm here. It's coming here. And the importance of physically showing up to these sorts of spaces and stages and connecting people in person, virtually, of course, but there's something to be said for really coming together. And that's something that humans deserve to experience. We are social animals. We benefit so much from meeting one another in person. So it's sad that that is actually a negative, that doing that is hurting our planet, right? To getting on a plane, to traveling. And that, I would say, has been the most difficult for me. If I can share a really personal story. So I posted a picture on Instagram, and the person I'm referring to is sitting in this room, and this is very relevant to him as well. I posted a picture on Instagram several years ago showing me getting on a plane, and the founder of our company, We Don't Have Time, at that time was not flying because of all the reasons we're discussing. It's carbon emissions. If it's not necessary, why do it? And a very principled person who I admire greatly, Ingmar Rentzhog. And so he saw me post a picture of me getting on a plane and immediately called me out. And it was like, why are you showing off that you're getting on a plane? And it really affected me in that I agreed that this is something that I never thought twice about. It's just natural for me to have to travel. And, it's something that is so required for work, but it's also pleasurable. You want to visit your family. You want to experience new places. And so the guilt resulted in me thinking that this was something that I needed to minimize as much as possible. At the same time, drove me to want to be able to I don't want people to feel guilty for living their lives, right?
Yeah.
This is not, that doesn't work. And we've seen the backlash from that in the election and why Donald Trump got elected in the United States. People are sick of being told what they can and can't do. And they're like, you got a chance, right? And that's in the United States, but the rest of the world is also like, you all had a chance to experience all the benefits of energy and what that brings to having a really fulfilling life. Why should the world not get to experience? So much of the world doesn't get to experience even flipping a light switch. And that's not fair. Humans deserve energy-rich lives. So now that experience, that moment, posting that picture on Instagram, all the way to where I am today, my goal is to allow people to have energy-rich lives, but to do it sustainably. How do we change the infrastructure and the systems that have fueled our growth for so long in a way that allows all humans on this planet to truly enjoy what they deserve to enjoy, purely just as part of the human existence? So I don't want people to feel guilty. We deserve to live our lives, but we just need to do it sustainably.
I love the bridge that you talk about systematic change and system level change, and then our behaviors as individuals. I am, from my background, a communication scientist, and this is a fascinating conversation, someone talking from behavioral sciences perspective and now us building the bridge between communications, how people connect and communicate with each other. And at the system level here at World Economic Forum in Davos, we have seen the conversation focusing on mainly on AI. Then the second topic has been geopolitical tensions. And of course, there are also many, you can see media coverage on what happened after, or what happens now after Monday's US inauguration. So your background, you've done a lot of risk communications around COVID-19 and also your media platform, We Don't Have Time. There's this sense of urgency and you get attention through that, you drive behavioral change through that, and then also with the goal to drive systematic change, right? Yep. So is COVID-19 and climate, are there comparable crises, and how does that shape the way we communicate?
It's all connected. Infectious disease outbreaks are coming from the fact that we are being really disrespectful to our environment. We have encroachment of natural habitats that's resulting in species that have lived for millennia in a certain way. They're now being introduced to other species, and humans are the driver behind that. And it's causing viruses to jump from one animal, let's say from a pig to a bat to a snake to a meerkat to a porcupine. We are creating the most interesting, unnatural habitats. And it's just a breeding ground for a virus to emerge and mutate. And that's what we saw happen with COVID-19. And epidemiologists know this. They're all over the world. There's hotspots that have been identified, especially in biodiverse areas like Colombia, like Brazil, like India, Bangladesh. And these are areas that you would expect a virus to mutate given the amount of habitat encroachment that is going on. And why is habitat encroachment going on? It's all the same story. It's all linked together, right? It's going on because we're clearing land to create farming opportunities and animal agriculture. And that is to feed billions of people now who want more animal protein in their diets. And so it's this vicious cycle that we're in that is undoubtedly not just causing more destruction of the planet, it's releasing carbon emissions, it's releasing infectious diseases, it's continuing to warm the planet, and we're in this cycle that we really need to remove ourselves from. So that's the connection between the two. Specifically with COVID-19 and climate change, both of these are risks that are viewed by our brains, by humans, as kind of not immediate. These are issues that are in the future, they're invisible, they're slow moving, they affect other populations, not us. Because infectious disease outbreaks and climate hit those cognitive triggers that actually result in risk attenuation, in that we don't actually perceive great risk around them because they're not in our face immediately. What are we worried about immediately? Driving safely on the street and ensuring that, we don't get hit by a car. That's what triggers our brains to act. And that's what triggers us to make decisions. That immediate safety, right? We don't think about future safety. We think we do, we say we do, right? It all sounds really good, but we're not actually, our brains are not designed to do that. And that's okay. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's how we're wired. That's something that humans have in common across the world, right? We have to actively override that innate wiring of our brain. So we start to care about infectious disease outbreaks. So we start to care about sea level rise, because these are future risks that we need to figure out a way to make immediate and tangible so we can act on them. And that's the point and purpose of We Don't Have Time, is to make the invisible visible, to make the future immediate.
Okay, and I love the fact how you bridge again risk and safety and sort of the immediate feeling, because you mentioned it already at the beginning. We don't want to make people feel guilty. There's an emotion, what I've observed, and we have discussed during this week too, that I see in the whole platform of climate communications and debate, and. Despite the sense of urgency and despite the statistics and science and knowledge we have, climate agenda isn't necessarily the top priority in boardrooms. We have seen now this week that everyone, world leaders, are convincing it is still a priority, but there's not that sense of urgency. And I claim that there is one reason behind it, and that might be fear. that decision makers, they worry about financial consequences, perhaps being claimed for greenwashing, or perhaps someone spots them greenwishing, and that leads to green hushing. So everyone ducks in, no one says a thing. 3 years ago, we saw companies communicating very aspirational, ambitious climate roadmaps, and now it's just a small percentage of those companies that do it. So how can we overcome that fear? If it's, you talked about long-term, immediate, how can we sort of calm everyone down and build that confidence? Then,
so it is communications, right? And as a communications professional, you understand this. We don't have to put millions and billions of dollars into actually changing perceptions, which is exactly what you see happen in healthcare, which is a lot of what you're seeing happening actually in climate as well. We can do this actually very cost effectively. It's tedious, but it works, and we have barely tried it. This is simply improving how we communicate. How do we close the gap between risk perception, as in the lack of fear around sea level rise, as one example, and the reality of what's actually coming? Even in Rotterdam, Netherlands, when I was doing my postdoctorate, my professor at Oxford at the time, he was a visiting professor at Rotterdam University, and he took me with him. And one of the examples that the university was so proud of was the gates, the Rotterdam gates, and a $1 billion project to prevent flooding for a city. And the Netherlands gets it better than so many other countries because of sea level where it falls. And so there was so much support for it, and there was an obvious, of course we need to put in this investment to protect our city. Even $1 billion, the year that it was, I think it was in the 90s, that it was designed, was too little. And ultimately, it was a useless $1 billion because it just wasn't high enough. So it would have required several $1 billion, but it was too difficult to get that sort of commitment. It was politically expedient to get the $1 billion, and ultimately that's a waste of $1 billion because it wasn't high enough to protect the city from flooding. So how do we fix that disconnect even with individuals, policymakers, countries that get it? It's still pervasive, right? It's obviously very pervasive in the United States, but even in parts of the world that I like to highlight, that I'm proud to be affiliated with, like the Netherlands, there's still a disconnect. So we really need to close that perception gap of how risky the future or something is going to be versus the reality of the risk. We have to look at the data, we have to look at the base rate statistics, we have to look at the facts, and then make decisions based on that. So how do you do that, right? Because again, it's not politically expedient. No politician is going to get reelected if they spend $100 million in New York City to create storm surge barriers against the next inevitable hurricane. Hurricane Sandy hit New York City, and that was a Category 2 hurricane. It's inevitable there's going to be a Category 3 or a Category 4. New Yorkers, so soon after Hurricane Sandy, decided to not allow for the immediate upfront cost of creating those storm surge barriers. Same thing, pretty much, as what happened in Rotterdam. And that is a communications challenge. Okay. How do we close that gap through communication?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and get to preparedness, actually. So bounce back a question to the audience here. If you think about your individual or professional context, what do you think? How could we bridge that gap, or how could we build confidence for individuals, leaders, political decision makers to be confident and communicate in a transparent, open way about not the perfect solutions, but their approaches and suggestions how to bridge that gap. And we do have a QR code here where you can submit your suggestions and reflections. And I would really like to get ideas. The GreenUp Climate Hub Davos is all about co-creating solutions for climate and nature. So please do submit your ideas, and let's see if we get some good guidelines for individuals, peers, leaders, and political decision makers for the challenge. Okay, well, I claim also that we have here in the audience and also online at home or in the offices the usual suspects. We talk about these issues with like-minded people, with climate conscious people. So how do we reach those people who might think differently or might feel insecure and might not have this level of awareness of the urgency?
So I think I made the case for communication. That's critical. And again, not expensive, but something that we just need to do more. And if we're in a communications crisis alongside of a climate crisis. So to answer your question, for decades, scientists have known this is coming, right? So why is there still denial? I mean, the majority of people are not denying anymore. The majority of people are looking for actions to take that are easy to do, and that little commitment results in more commitment. So we're doing that with We Don't Have Time, these types of forums, being in Davos, having a presence, and continuing it through the year. Davos is January, right? We continue the conversation through the UN conferences and so many other locations where these conversations reach, large swaths of the global public. But how do we target everyone, especially the deniers, right? And it comes down to trust. So I can't underscore this enough. This was my doctoral research 15 years ago, and it was, this is the most wonky thing I will say, I promise, but basically up to 50% of the variance in decision-making as a human behavioral outcome, predicting what that behavioral outcome will be, comes down to how trusted the communicator is to that person, right? So the data on climate change in one year and out the other, if that recipient doesn't trust who it's coming from. And that's what we've screwed up for decades. So now there's no more excuse. The 15 years since I did that research, I'm not a primary researcher anymore, but it's been validated, it's been replicated. We know the importance of trust. So the role that we all have to play now is we are communicators, regardless of what your job title is. If you're in this room, you're definitely a communicator, but even a domestic engineer that identifies as somebody who's a homemaker is a communicator because they're communicating to their friends, to their family. So our role now is to identify who trusts us, and those of us who are in positions to be able to identify trusted spokespeople, do that for your companies, for your organizations. And it might not be you, and that's okay, right? It should be a variety of people. And ensure that the right person, because the facts aren't going to change. The science, the data, that's not going to change. It's who you identify to communicate and translate that data in a way that resonates to the audiences. That's key. We have not done that enough yet.
Yeah. And also we haven't realized that trust is built, it's mutual, it's built on relationships. And it's not only identifying trustful persons, but also building those long-term relationships. Perfect. You mentioned something just when you finished about relatable communications. So we saw on Monday at the kickoff the Climate Hub Davos, Professor Johan Rockström shared the pioneering work on the planetary boundaries, and it's a perfect example of making scientific results understandable and relatable, but that's not always the case. It's climate change, climate impact, the whole field is very complex. There's a lot of data, a lot of good research, but let's face it, it's not put in a format that would be easy to understand, relate to. And it's also the whole conversation what we have had also here at WEF, it's full of acronyms and jargon. So you start with SDG or ESG or COP, or my favorite one is UNFCCC. So, and this is just normal language with people here in the audience who know the acronyms. But if that's the conversation what we have with the wider public, that's not going to succeed. So what do you think? Yeah. How do we untangle this for the public?
So this is the academic in me. I can't help it. No matter how much you try to remove yourself from academia, it always sucks you back in. Because research, it's not expensive to take some time to understand what your audience is, what perceptions are. If we asked questions, if we actually created some focus groups, if we segmented audiences, let's say the United States, right? And we created these broad demographics of, age range and gender, and then segmented those populations. It's tedious. But then we took the time to create some focus groups, do some qualitative research, quantitative surveys to follow up and make sure what we're seeing is accurate, and understand and take some time to understand what they know and don't know. Mm-hmm. So start there. Yep. Start with the actual audience and see how much do they actually know. Because you will never say COP, right? to a focus group of, let's say, middle-aged white males from Wisconsin, especially if you take the time to ask them what they know about climate, and they don't even have Climate 101 down, right? The difference between weather and climate, which is what I found when I did exactly this. So why would I ever bring up COP or UNFCCC when I need to spend some time explaining the difference between weather and climate? And that's okay. We need to recognize we are experienced professionals. We're in a bubble. Our goal, it's our duty, it's our responsibility to bring the public, to bring policymakers, all the way from local to multilateral efforts and negotiations, over to what we need to see done based in the data, the science, and stats that we know. But why are we demanding or expecting them to have even a baseline level of knowledge? That is extremely arrogant of us, and I think also what has been the reason that we haven't succeeded in the climate movement. It's also very much, and as somebody who's been part of the Kamala Harris presidential campaign, I'm not removing myself from this. I was part of the bubble that strongly believed that we had the baseline, that everybody understood the baseline of some of these things. And I'm not just talking about climate, it's broader than that. And I was shocked, the campaign was shocked, everybody was shocked when the election results came out. So we need to just have a moment, look in the mirror and recognize that who we're trying to convert, understand what they care about, where they're coming from, what are their mental models is what we call it in behavioral science. Start there and then create a communication strategy with trusted spokespeople for that audience, come up with it, test it. Would you ever release an untested pharmaceutical drug? It's equally as bad to release an untested communication. So test it and then release it and watch how different the outcomes are.
Okay, so is breaking the bubble the recipe, or welcoming people to our bubble? Which way should we play it?
Breaking the bubble.
We
need to break this bubble.
Okay.
I mean, think, you're walking along the promenade. How many people do you know? Every other person you're probably saying hello to or waving to. Mm-hmm. What is that? How is that possible? What is that? We are such a bubble, and it's a privilege to be here. And it's really important that we're here and that we're having these conversations. But recognize that we are in the 0.0001% of the world. And I'm a data scientist, and I know that statistic wasn't right. But we are a very small minority. So now we are very privileged, and now it's our job to use the science to reach audiences that we need to reach, to align audience perceptions with the science. That's ultimately the end goal, because that's what will win. That's a win-win for everyone. Individuals all over the world need to align their perceptions with science, because it will safeguard themselves, their health, their communities, their futures, their country's futures. The only way to do that is to bridge the gap. Because right now, because people care about things that don't matter compared to climate or compared to other things, right? Infectious, all of these things are very linked. Nuclear, we can talk about all the different things that aren't being prioritized. Our priorities are skewed. So it's really important to use communication to close that perception and reality gap, to prioritize in a way that is realistic to the reality of the risks that we're facing as a globe, to protect the most amount of people we can.
We have time for one more question, and that's about what we might be missing. So in your view, what is that one aspect of climate comms communication we might be overlooking?
So I'm very privileged to be part of this climate communicators community, which everything that I've been sharing with you comes from not just me, but also active research that's underway. So the Yale School of Climate Communications, for example, Michael Mann at the University of Pennsylvania, that everyone gets together and is able to share, in real time. They don't wait for the papers to get published and come out, right? That's the problem with academia too. It takes months, years sometimes for research to come out. So we have a group where we see each other in real time regularly. And the same thing has been coming up, right, for the last years, is we just don't have anyone outside of the dorky scientists that are involved. It's really great that we have youth voices. We need more. It's great we have activists. It's great we have indigenous voices. We have more spokespeople across wider, diverse range. And that's important because we're trying to reach a wide, diverse range, right? But what we don't have, and it's the same reason, if we're really going to bring this full circle, that I felt so guilty flying on that plane and getting called out for it, right? It's the same reason we can't get the Kardashians and the Taylor Swifts and the LeBron James and the, those that have massive platforms and their fan bases really trust them. And they are not speaking out on these topics because they don't want to be called hypocrites. They want to be able to live their lives and fly in their private jets and even though we've had personal conversations with some of their teams and they want to do it, right? They want to actually be a supporter for climate. They know it's the right thing to do, but they're nervous about the backlash. So what I would implore everyone, what I think we're missing is partnerships with big trusted spokespeople, right? Like the Taylor Swifts, the athletes, because they have a disproportionate amount of influence on their audiences. So we need to establish those relationships. And then you and all your friends and family and colleagues, et cetera, need to be happy that they're doing that, as opposed to calling them out for being hypocrites. Because at this point, that's not helping us. And we don't need to shame individual behaviors. As a behavioral scientist, I love that we're changing individual behaviors. I love that there's an awareness of it, but it's a drop in the bucket. We know that the system has to change. We know the global energy system has to change to allow it to be easier for individuals to make better decisions around their energy use. It's not easy for us right now. So if we can just recognize that, not make each other feel guilty, not call out those that are speaking up as hypocrites, will go a long way. And in the process, we're all becoming environmental stewards. We teach our children the golden rule: be nice to others as you want them to be nice to you. Let's teach them how to respect the planet, and make that a core value and just become better environmental stewards. That's where behavioral change will really help. That acknowledgement that the planet is not for us to exploit, that it's actually something that requires nourishment both ways.
And if I may build on that and build the bridge from the scale and systemic level, for me, the missing piece is connection. And I've seen that also here at WEF in Davos. It's that interpersonal connection. We are very busy pushing our own agendas, telling our own stories. The running gag is that when you meet a new person at a networking event, the question you hear is, what brings you to Davos? And then you start your elevator pitch and you push it. And this we do also when we campaign. And we forget to ask, who are you? Listen and try to really understand what that other person thinks and feels and what might move him or her. Sweta, this has been really insightful.
Thank you.
And enjoyable, fun. We get to follow you on your platform, and there are many streaming videos from this week's sessions, what you hosted there up on the mountain and what happened here at the Climate Hub Davos. I wish that we can continue this conversation and connection. And now it's time for our second part of the session. So let's open the stage for some tangible examples of meaningful climate communications. Stories have the power to change how we see the world, and they do inspire action too. But good storytelling is not an easy task. And up next, we have here examples how open sourcing high-quality content can create such powerful narratives. And we have three storytellers and leaders: Colin Butfield, co-founder and director of Open Planet Studios; Dangour, Director of Climate and Health at Wellcome Trust; and Dr. Okito Wedi, founder and CEO of Creative Development. Welcome to the stage, and thank you again.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Even more brilliant. Brilliant. Amazing. Superb. Any more words? No? Speak. For breakfast I had. Okay, good. All right. Thank you very much. My name's Dangour. I'm delighted to be starting off this session, and I'm going to be incredibly rude in that I'm going to start and then run because my boss is speaking somewhere else and I have to be there. So apologies for that. It's classic Davos. My apologies, but I'm really thrilled to be here to kick off this session. So I'm going to start with an imagine. Imagine a city. Imagine a city where in the summer, it's weeks on end, it's 45 or 50 degrees centigrade. Imagine a city where there's an invasion of mosquitoes carrying new diseases. Imagine a city where it's harder and harder to buy the foods and the fruits and vegetables that you want because agriculture is suffering. Imagine a city where water scarcity is a constant concern. So that's not a city 30 years away in some far-flung part of the world. That's parts of Europe. That's parts of South Africa. That's parts of, some very, very parts of India. Very, very, very developed parts of the world are struggling already from the massive impacts of climate change. So I'm going to start with my priority, and I'm going to start with we've just heard, what are your priorities, and making sure you don't, they don't slip down the list. So my priority is health. And the climate crisis is a human health crisis. And it's abundantly clear, and it's here now. So we see huge numbers of people now already, because of extreme heat, dying from or suffering from heat stress and mortality. We see the impacts of climate change on the environment, on the natural systems, affecting the distribution of mosquitoes, or affecting the ability of farmers to grow crops, or affecting mental health. And we see the impacts of climate change affecting health because of societal breakdown, migration, and conflict. And these are real impacts that are happening now. So Wellcome is a major UK-based global philanthropy working on science to improve the health of everyone. We have, as one of our 4 key areas of investment in the science of climate change and human health, not only to enable countries to quantify the impacts of climate change on human health, but also to understand the benefits of mitigation for health, the potential benefits of mitigation for health, and the adaptations that are going to protect human health from the ravages of climate change. And so we fund hundreds of millions of pounds worth of science a year to answer those sorts of questions. And the consequence, of course, is that we get loads and loads and loads of papers published in journals. Now, if the solution to the world's problems was publish more papers in journals, there would be no problems on the planet. So unfortunately, we need to find other ways to tell these stories, these really, really critical, important stories. And we are increasingly seeing and using the power of the creative and cultural industries to tell these stories, to create that narrative and to tell these stories. Just last night, in fact, I was at a dinner. I was a slightly intimidating dinner. The art part of WEF had a very fancy dinner at the Hilton, and we heard some extraordinary stories from Melanie Brown, from Misty Copeland and others, telling their stories about being how they overcame extraordinary hardships and are now leading initiatives. For example, Melanie Brown against domestic abuse, and Misty Copeland, driving diversity within the ballet world in America. Really extraordinary about how you can go through these in terrible hardships. The stories are really gut-wrenching, and yet coming out with a very, using the power of their experience to tell a really, really important story. And so we are increasingly now doing that and trying to make these stories real and human. But they have to be authentic. If I sit in London and say, let's make some story about what's going on in India, it has it doesn't touch reality, and it's totally inappropriate. And so we're increasingly working with local storytellers to make local products about their lived experience of climate change. And these stories have massive power. And we're really thrilled to have worked, in fact, with Open Planet to create a whole database, a whole wardrobe full of stories and full of examples of local stories in Kenya and South Africa to drive this message home. The climate crisis is a health crisis. And we can sit here in Davos and talk about it, but the realities in many of the poorest parts of the world amongst the most vulnerable communities are here now and are utterly devastating. So to explain how some of that work has been done and to really give you much more insight into the processes, I'm really delighted to hand over now to Colin and Okito, who are going to talk about the work that we funded, that Wellcome funded through Open Planet, to really build those stories and those narratives with real authenticity about the impacts of climate change on health. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Alan. And thank you for the incredible support Wellcome's given to this project, which Okito and I are going to talk about, but also for driving climate change and human health as an issue up the agenda. We're going to come back to that a lot in the next few minutes. But first, just to quickly introduce myself and our part of the project before I pass to Okito. So I was interested. I was at an event last night when I was introduced as one of the speakers, and somebody to my left, she was a chief scientist at an organisation, and then there was somebody who was a UK ambassador to something else, and it went down the line. And here's Colin. He's a storyteller. And I thought, I mean, it wasn't meant in any judgmental way, but I sort of took it a bit like stories. Like, you've got massive climate science problems, you've got massive inequality problems, you've got all of these. What does storytelling bring to it? But of course, at the heart of this, we are storytelling creatures. Stories, ever since the first human civilizations, it's been stories that have defined who we are and how we view the world and how we view our place within the world. Whether it's nations, whether it's religions, whether it's how we view ourselves as a species or as individuals, often that's underpinned by a core narrative or story that has learned, evolved, been passed from one trusted person to another trusted person. So as our small role within this, seeing that there was a role for storytelling to help shift the agenda on climate change, on biodiversity, on human equality, we wanted to set up an organisation that would do that. And my co-founder, Johnny's somewhere in here, waving there, and I set up a company called Open Planet Studios. And we work on a number of different levels. We produce big documentaries going to cinemas and streaming platforms, as well as storytelling events and short form examples that go at events like WEF and the COPs. But we quickly realised there was a massive market failure in storytelling. The kind of stuff we produce that maybe goes on a BBC or Netflix or something is enormously expensive to make. And it's completely out of the reach of most people to get hold of that footage. And that footage is, of course, owned by the people that paid for it, which is usually the broadcast. And that's perfectly fair. But it means that if you're an NGO or you're a teacher or you're a charity, accessing that footage is almost impossible. Secondly, most things aren't ever being recorded. Most of the changes that are happening in the world are never being recorded. And if they are being recorded, they're not being shared very often. Thirdly, how do you trust the information and the visuals you see, especially in a world of AI and sort of very soon text-to-image AI becoming more widely renowned? How do you know what can be trusted? But then fourthly, and easily the most important bit, and the sort of bridge to bring Okito in, is that it used to be that storytelling, at least TV and film, was broadcast. It was one too many. A company would make something, it would go out, and lots of people would watch it. We all know storytelling doesn't work that way anymore. It's decentralized. We all trust people we know, people we connect with. People are viewing things in a myriad of different ways. So what we really wanted to do, and why we set up Open Planet as a platform, which Alan was talking about, was to create a free library that has thousands, right now about 12 or 13,000 clips of the planet, all completely verified, linked to where they are, all utterly free to use for anybody using them for non-profit purposes. So people could take that footage, mix it with their own, tell their own story in their own language on their own platforms to their own audience without any interference from anybody else. Because that's when you start to get trust, and that's when you start to build and change the narrative and change the story. But of course, to do that, you need to work with incredible people and start to get interesting content in there. So I'll pass to Okito to set up your story.
Fantastic. And I'm African, so we have issues around respectability, politics, and shame. So I kind of feel like I need to stand up right now. But if you don't mind, I would love to sit down.
I only stood up because Alan was standing up, and he stood up.
Great.
We can stay seated for the rest of it.
Okay, great. My name is Okito Wedi. I'm the founder and CEO of Crtve Development. We are a Pan-African storytelling and advocacy organization, and really dedicated towards inspiring and catalyzing social change and economic investment towards the African continent, really trying to create the Africa that we want to see. So in layman's terms, what does that mean? Basically, we try and simplify and socialize African-owned and African-owned and led development issues, complex development issues, to speak to audiences that don't come to WEF, that don't go to UNGA, that don't go to COP, but need to understand the issues, key stakeholders who are part of the action, the ambitious action that we that we need to see, but often don't see themselves, recognize themselves in the way that we speak about these issues, the way that we disseminate this information, which I always find interesting because we talk about the fact that people don't know. I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, moved to South Africa as a child because of the issues that we're dealing with, the conflict issues that we're dealing with at the time. I don't know about this thing that people don't know. I think we intuitively know that something is happening. We're seeing the changes. Crops are not growing as they should. The rainy seasons, the seasons are just not doing what it does. We don't have language for it. Or at least we haven't expanded the language around it. And so this is essentially what creative development looks to do. To your point, Colin, I always find it interesting, particularly at events like this, when I'm asked the question around the power of storytelling to influence advocacy, to influence engagement, because to your point, everything starts and ends with a story, right? There's something about storytelling and creativity that speaks to essentially what it means to be a human being, right? It's truly fundamental. There's something primal about it. It speaks to our collective search for meaning and connection and beauty. And whether you are a tech billionaire living in a penthouse in mid-Manhattan or a factory worker living in a dilapidated shack in the middle of Nairobi, we're still in search of these same things. And so through the power of creativity and storytelling, essentially what we are trying to do is have people, one, recognize their inherent humanity within themselves, and subsequently acknowledge that within the other person or the person in front of you, right? Because we think, again, this is where it all starts. We can spout all the data points. We can have all the meetings that we want and write all the white papers that we can read. But if I fundamentally don't care about what you're talking about because I do not see myself reflected in anything that you have said, that action that we're talking about, it just won't happen. And we're seeing this play out in real time right now, being at WEF. And so this is essentially what we try and do in our work by using the power of creativity and storytelling to simplify these issues, but mostly to have people recognize themselves in a larger, more diverse collective story. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. And so the way this project started off was, so Johnny and I, particularly Johnny, had a huge background in natural history filmmaking. So we'd filmed lots of things about climate change and polar bears and stuff like that, which is important and it's true and it's all happening and it engages people. But what we felt the really, really weird thing is probably the most compelling story, the most universal story to all of us that should cross all political divides should be the story of climate change and human health. We all know people we care about that we don't want to have air pollution. We don't want them to be suffering. That connection of human to human and understanding the impacts of climate change on human health should be the most emotive, the most persuasive to act that there is. Yet you hardly see it anywhere. You hardly see it on any TV channels. You hardly see it at any events. You hardly see it shared. So it was a starting point of how do we begin to start that? And we spoke to Wellcome and they were very supportive with the idea. But the first thing we thought, of course, is that's not my story to tell. I live in the UK. It's not, we're affected to a small degree, but not to a large degree. It's not our story to tell. So we reached out to some filmmakers that we knew in Kenya, first of all, and in South Africa later, to try to find what were the most interesting stories, what were the stories that they knew that they were aware of, and who were the people they knew that could film it, and crucially, who were the people that could then take that content and turn it into things that would engage people. And one of the things that sort of underpins the whole sort of idea of Open Planet is that if you capture incredible images, you capture incredible stories, they're based on truth, then there is a myriad of different ways to tell it. So with this project, what we wanted to test was, could we tell these stories using the same filming, so the same amount of cost of filming just once within a place, to tell stories at a COP or on social media or from a British NGO, or from community storytellers in a place, or social media, a myriad different ways. The same story, but in different forms, in different formats. And that was the idea, and we've tried it twice now. So we thought, given we have a great big screen and lots of speakers, we should probably introduce a couple of films. So do you want to go for the first one?
Absolutely. So we're going to be looking at Kibera Futura. So this is a studio in Kenya that produced this particular film. I'm not sure if it's going to pop up now. They're a fantastic group. So essentially they use animation as well as the open planet content to essentially be able to tell a story around the floods that happened within South Africa, KwaZulu-Natal more specifically. They through the art form of animation as well as narration by an award-winning poet by the name of Dolphinage. They're really looking at the intersection of climate resilience, community action, as well as the impacts of climate change in South Africa. It's actually it's a really interesting film that they did, and their perspective of it, because again, this is an animation studio based in Nairobi, Kenya, telling a story about South Africa through their perspective, and again, kind of breaking through that monolith that Africa is just one story. And so even just having their perspective and speaking into something and making those correlations and highlighting the synergies between what has been experienced in KwaZulu-Natal and some of the things that you might see in Kenya is really interesting, and they're just kind of like a great bunch to work with. So yeah, that's the first film.
Time traveler natumia grafiki kama mpoto kusafiri kwenye nyakati, narudi nyuma karne moja na miaka 24 exactly, a long wise man kwenye quest, nikifuata nyota ya historia kushuhudia a virgin swamp give birth to city, vijiji kugeuka kwa mji na mji kuwa jiji, na cheki msitu ikipe way for shanties, wanyama mwitu kugeuzwa exotic cuisines na trophies. Anchor in Nairobi kabla wanubi wabatize Kibra. I guess ni msitu bado, ila badala ya wanyama kwa miti tumejaza watu kwa mabati. Barely enough food kwa kabati kulisha wenyeji, barely enough kwa wallet kuhakikisha balance kwa diet. So chipo mwitu, chapo na mutura ndo zinajaza matumbo. Toka Anchor in Nairobi, hali ya hewa saini nare Nairobi. Si ajabu mafuriko kuacha wenyeji bila makazi Kibera, na kiangazi kufanya keja kushika nare Nairobi. Si ajabu maji safi yamekuwa ni gold kwa mfereji, ilifunzwa mbu wanapenda joto. Si ajabu malaria bado ndio sababu kubwa, Lang'ata ni mwisho wa safari kwa watoto. Japo bado kuna ideas golden kwa akili ndani ya email iko trapped kwa ufukara, na bado kuna nia kufikia ushindi. Kwa hizi streets vichochoro ndo barabara, cheki Kibra ya usoni kupitia macho ya wasanii wakichora. Jui sanaa ndio taa, hizi paintings zinatupia picha vile Kibera inaweza kaa, zinaangazia Kibera vile inafaa, vile Kibera itakaa, vile Kibera itafaa. Juizi mabati zinajua extremes between kustand tall na kubomoka, na hizi shanti zinajua dreams za wenyeji wanasaka kuomoka. Hizi mabati zinajua extremes, na hizi shanti zinajua dreams.
Can I say one thing
You
about
definitely can.
this?
Yeah, please.
Which I'm very proud about. So this particular film has actually been viewed or has reached over 10 million people digitally, and through grassroots screenings across Kenya and South Africa, we're looking at something about 12,000 people have been able to directly see that. We're talking about decision makers, local community leaders, and again, what Wax Studios and John does so amazingly is kind of to the conversation that we started with in finding the entry points around what matters to communities. So we're going to talk about climate through the lens of food. We're going to talk about climate through the lens of are we able to the droughts that we've been experiencing. We're going to talk about climate through just the everyday interactions that we're having, and they're sort of doing away with the constraints around trying to get the language exactly right, but hitting the points that needs to be understood. And we can see the changes and the engagement that we've been able to have since. So very proud of that. Yeah,
and they're fantastic, guys. If you ever get a chance to hear them speak or watch them online, they dialed into a session we did at Wellcome Trust, and they talked through how they composed it, how they did the animation, the roots of the stories, and it was brilliant. You could see an entire room full of people learning new ways of storytelling and new approaches and just, infectious characters. So the second one's completely different. I mean, deliberately, there were lots of films that were created out of this process, but we wanted to show 3 that felt very, very different. This one was much more creative for an event like Davos. It's actually for COP29. And the idea here was for a room of decision makers, for a room of, quite often you get panels and you get moments and people, you need to break it up a little bit and take somebody actually to a place and get them to feel it and get a little bit of emotion coming through. So this one is very, very, very different style. And this one, well, it speaks for itself. I'll talk about it a little bit more afterwards, but it's all about healthy cities and how you build them, particularly focusing on South Africa here.
These Durban residents are taking part in a special project. They live in the city's informal settlements and are working with researchers using art to share their experiences of flooding.
So you get danger basically within the community.
Their knowledge is crucial as the city builds its resilience to extreme weather events.
If you see the red flag, that means you should evacuate.
Informal settlements have developed precariously along Durban's many rivers, and the communities living in them are now on the front line of climate change.
Deadly floods claimed over 400 lives.
In 2022, Durban suffered some of its worst ever floods.
Roads have been destroyed.
It's been a night of hell, really. It's been hard.
The whole city felt the impacts, but the informal settlements, where infrastructure is already limited, were hardest hit.
I'd say 1,000 families lost their houses.
They have suffered long-lasting health impacts.
After the flood, the public toilets were washed away.
This water is highly polluted, a lot of disease and infection.
And a legacy of mental health problems.
For example, anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress disorder.
I've lost everything I had, and it took away my freedom. And every time when I'm thinking of it, I try to get away from it. But I'm still trying to be strong. Yeah.
People are always worried that anytime the rain would come and their houses would be washed away. So they're living in fear. That's how life is in here.
And that is why collecting knowledge from the most affected communities is so vital as Durban develops its climate adaptation plans.
Engaging with the communities is a crucial point. It's giving the community the power to address their issues, to give us their ideas and also their feelings.
Most African cities are facing the same challenges of ensuring that these communities are not left behind, because they are the ones that are most vulnerable. They are the ones that are going to be the most impacted by climate change. but they also hold incredible insights into what works and what doesn't work.
While the priority in the informal settlements is to survive the next flood, some community members are also getting involved in solutions that keep Durban's river system healthy, essential to this city's resilience. Upstream of the informal settlements, there are projects to restore urban nature, like this one, creating precious wetlands which act like sponges, absorbing more water from storm events.
Solid waste is going down the stream, so I think that will also help our community.
Elsewhere, teams of residents are removing litter and waste, reducing blockages that can lead to flash floods. Expanding solutions like these and joining up action is the key to citywide success.
Cities are where the majority of people live and work. Every city may face unique challenges, but collaboration is at the heart of building healthier and climate-resilient cities.
You need people. You need a group of people, not just one or two. That's it.
So the idea of that one was really how climate change and human health just wasn't being discussed at COPs hardly at all, and that was very much there to start to prompt that discussion within particular sessions. But there was others like it that have been showed. I think is Jamila Mahmood here? Yeah, you are. Hi. We showed it. Made another one with Jamila in Malaysia, but also bridging those stories of climate change and human health from different parts of the world. So you're getting a sense of what's happening around the world, but also how people are responding to it, and that quite often the response actually is best when it's community-led. And that was the sort of message that those kind of films went out. But obviously there's a lot of footage that came with doing that, and people took it and interpreted it in different ways.
So, yeah, kind of as a continuation to the story in regards to what happened in Durban, we then went and found a group of 5 South African filmmakers to really ground the issue. Again, if you look at some of the numbers, we're talking about over 400 deaths in KwaZulu-Natal from the floodings, for over, I think, something like 40,000 people unemployed, 4,000 home lost. It's big, and it can paralyze when you're looking at the issue through the macro. And so by partnering with 5 filmmakers who could really ground the issue just in the kind of everyday reality in terms of how that was playing out within their lives, and telling a much more intersectional story of climate through the lens of fashion, climate through the lens of mental health, climate through the lens of intergenerational knowledge sharing, climate through the lens of a father trying to explain to his son, why is there no water? We live in KwaZulu-Natal. We know what the world thinks about South Africa. Right? These things don't happen in South Africa, and yet this is what communities are dealing with every single day, and the impacts in the aftermath. Again, finding those points of entry. But more than that, more than just being able to talk to a story of climate change and adaptation, I think what these stories do is talk to what does resilience look like in real time that doesn't feel kind of condescending. And again, just something that we talk about at nice conferences, but how is this actually playing out within these communities? What does ownership of the story and the narrative look like post disasters like that? And just expanding our imagination, expanding our language, and expanding the ideas that we might have around like what healing would look like for communities who are impacted in this kind of way, because again, they're not just the vulnerable and they're not just victims. This is like their everyday lives. So this is the teaser I think that we wanna show.
like, no. Help. Thank you.
In the grand tapestry of life, every thread is intertwined, weaving a delicate balance of our planet's ecosystems. This symphony of wonder resonates with every note, a harmony that's been disrupted by a discordant note. Climate change. The harsh reality of fast fashion's impact on our planet and its inhabitants cannot be ignored. The production, distribution, and consumption of cheap, trendy clothing have severe consequences that have played a huge part in affecting our Earth's climate.
The truth is, since the tornado, I had about 10 dreams of tornadoes happening again. I could see that the tornado or floods could happen again because I'd say always before the tornado, there wasn't really heavy winds that we experienced in Tongache. But since the tornado, every week you'll get a day where it's very heavy winds. Climate change does scare me because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, if there'll be enough food for us, so our lives will be constantly in danger.
By the way, I'm not pressing anything.
The effects of flooding often compound existing challenges, such as limited access to clean water and sanitation, further heightening the risk of disease outbreaks like cholera. Environmentalists caution that deforestation and poor urban planning makes worse the severity of these floods by reducing natural water drainage and destabilizing riverbanks.
Authorities are urging communities to stay informed and to take proactive measures.
It's not just about what they do, Mfanami. Kodwa sonke sinendima esiyidlalayo kulokho. Yabona Junior, we might not be able to stop lokushisa lokho. But what I know is that if we work together, Mfana, to protect each other, ushintsho sizoletha kule ndawo.
Okay. I'm not entirely sure what happened with that last one. Do you want to say that?
Yeah. So again, just snippets of the 3 of the 5 films. I think 2 things. This is the first time they're being screened, and so we are in preparations to have them screened in local communities and across South Africa. But I think I want to say 2 things specifically about this entire process and what it has meant to the filmmakers and the teams that have worked on these projects. There is something about being able to have high quality content, which was produced by which was provided by Open Planet, that brings dignity back into the creative process. I don't know, but there seems to be this kind of long entrenched, insidious idea that poor people, disenfranchised people, people who come from vulnerable communities don't appreciate, create, or inhabit beauty. And so there's just this weird idea around, okay, we're going to go for reach at the expense of being able to produce high quality work, and which again I've never really understood, because would you watch that? No, probably not. Would you wear that probably not. So why would a 20-year-old from a community like this be interested in some of the content that we've seen in the past, right? These are really intimate things. There are their stories being told that are being offered up to us. And so I think with being able to work with these kind of creatives who might not on their own have access and resources to secure the kind of high-level content that we would see in towards the West, it felt like we were able to exchange on equal standing. It wasn't just communities being exploited and extracted for their stories so that we can go and showcase something really cool at these kind of conferences. There is a dignity back into the process. And again, if we are thinking about what does a democratizing content, decolonizing global development and how we think about that, and dignity being a key metric around that, then it brings up important questions around quality. And we can see that happen in real time. And then the last thing I want to say, at Creative Development, we do joy. And it's kind of a weird thing within the social justice space because it feels like there is no space for it, right? Especially when you're dealing with issues of the like. But there's something about the creative process and having filmmakers come together, hold the integrity of terrible stories, of terrible incidences. So that's not lost. But in this process of co-creation with these communities, with partners such as Open Planet and the Wellcome Trust, it's very joyful and can hold more. We get fatigued and tired when we're constantly seeing the kind of awful things that we see all the time. I'm sure anyone who has a therapist will tell you, don't watch that kind of stuff, right? So you feel that in watching their films. There is a care and there's even a joyfulness that's able to hold space in a way that we don't usually see in this kind of space. So those are probably my two big takeaways. Yeah.
Yeah, we felt the same. I know the creative team at Open Planet just absolutely loved it. Just finding that, I suppose, that joy of exchanging stories about seeing people tell stories in a variety of different ways and different means was brilliant. But we've got time for a couple of questions. But can I steal the first one? Because I'd love to know what would be the dream? Like, how big could this get? How could storytelling transform issues around climate change and human health? How are some of the other creatives that you work with, whose work perhaps wasn't featured here, how could you imagine this expanding?
Yeah, at least for me, the dream and the work that we're trying to do at Creative Development, as I've been hopping on for the last 30 minutes, is expanding the language, right? I in my prior life, I was a medical doctor. I was a practicing physician, and even I didn't understand the interconnectedness between climate with health. It felt like it was something over there. And it's only in the works of creative development and in the recent years where you begin to realize everything is everything. And like a physician, where I'm not my medical terminology so that I can speak to my colleagues. But when I'm dealing with a patient, I don't care. My concern is not whether you can understand my medical terminology. It's about us agreeing what is happening, what is the course of treatment, and how do we move forward and get that done. So this expansion of the language, I think creatives are able to do that. At least from an African perspective, where you have different dialects, you have different cultures, you have different experiences, being able to incorporate that in the climate discourse, not have that sit as an appendage, or like an auxiliary thing, but that creatives would find a space within the larger conversation that feels authentic, that they would have space in spaces like WIF, and not have that feel like there are just the vibey thing that we have at the end of a conference when we want to have a dinner, but they have actually something to say and offer. In terms of how we're thinking about policy formulation and action. That's what I would love to see, which means that we kind of need to humble ourselves and ask ourselves, what are we able to let go of? What is essential as we want to move this conversation forward? And are we allowing ourselves to bring in unusual partners to the table to help us rethink what this could potentially look like? And I think it's those who have not been so indoctrinated by the climate talk, by the development talk, and who can speak to this simply, deeply, honestly, that will have the greatest impact.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, at the end of it, you always see the pieces of content that connect most is when you connect with another human being's story. It's natural. It's exactly how we'd imagine it. But those are the things that stay with people. That's always the things that we've ever been involved with or we've shared that others have made that has always come back with the greatest response. The things that where you connect with another person's reality and another person's story, and it gives you hope in some way, shape or form. We've just got a couple of minutes. Has anybody got any questions? Oh, yeah, lady at the front. Bear in mind, it's quite bright. I can't always see at the back. Sorry.
Convenient for you. Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Mila. I work with a social impact company called Rios. And this is fantastic. Congratulations. I'm completely on board with what you're doing. I'm working on a program of work about the world beyond 1.5, which is about changing the narratives beyond 1.5, and primarily understanding that we still have agency. We're not going to fall off a cliff. In fact, if it was going to happen, it might have already happened. We are going to live in like very complex circumstances, but where we still have agency. And what I love about what you're doing is you're tapping into that agency and the hope that comes with agency, and that actually we have a lot more agency when it comes to adaptation. With mitigation, we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But actually, it's completely out of our control. Whereas adaptation, we have some control, and therefore we have some agency, and so people can, gain hope from that. So that's why I'm really on board with this. The beyond 1.5 is beyond health. So I'd love to talk to you afterwards. But my question is actually about that climate and health framing, because I'm just wondering, this seems like it's far beyond climate and health, and climate and health is like, we talk about it. I live in Geneva, Jamila lives in Geneva, or has been in Geneva, I'm not sure if, climate and health nexus and everything, but it's a bit of a technical thing. It's about a nexus because we have climate organizations and health organizations, so we call it a nexus, but at the end of the day, this is about adaptation at the local level, and it's all integrated for local people. So why are you calling this climate and health? Is it because the foundation that supported it has a climate and health program? Or are you, or is it actually within a bigger framing? And how do you think about that bigger story? And is climate and health actually the best framing for the stories you're trying to tell? Or is it something else? So sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but that was what was on my mind.
No, it was a great question. Well, I'll start on post you, but yeah. So I suppose in many respects we're not calling it anything in the sense that we haven't. Although the title of this talk had climate and health, when the content's being released in the world, it hasn't been labelled climate and health at all. So it's just stories from a place in a way that they're happening. So I suppose it's only really been labelled when we brought it into forums like this, because it does sort of get talked about in those boxes. Whereas I think when we've been releasing it online, or when there've been screenings and things like that, it's not been put into that context necessarily at all. So, because you're right, it's sort of a policy wonkish sort of box to describe it. But in terms of what would be better, what have you found resonated when?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you said. And one of the big pieces of work that we're trying to do right now is, again, how do we reframe adaptation, right, as really the thing that we're talking about for vulnerable communities. The reason why at least we went with climate and health outside of it just kind of works in people's schedulings and for convenings like this, it's the low-hanging fruit in a community or in a place like KwaZulu-Natal that has at a time the highest HIV rate in the world at one point of time. Very few people didn't have some kind of interaction with the healthcare system. So health is a thing that is spoken about incessantly. And so, again, we're trying to figure out, okay, what is the low-hanging fruit or an entry point that we can come and start a climate conversation that touches on a lot of other things. Health felt like the most accessible thing to us. So even just in terms of how we're able to screen and where this could screening at hospitals, it's screening at clinics because people are there. right? This is a bedrock within the community, but still understanding that, to your point, it's really a climate and development nexus, and how we're able to tell a larger story around climate and health, climate and education, climate and gender, right? So yeah, but just for that piece of context in terms of why the health piece for these particular stories.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, let's speak afterwards. It sounds great what you're doing. We've just got time for one more, I think. Okay, we've got two. Let's go for two more. The two people have their hands up. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Richa. I have my own consulting firm around sustainability. It was very nice listening to all this, seeing all the stories that you put together. They were really nice. My question to you is, what would be your advice to the daily people like me who want to tell their stories? Very basic, but kind of influence your own network with these positive thoughts. But then we don't have the faculties or the technology to develop such impressive video content. So if you were to advise me that this is how you can, quickly put it together, maybe just keep it audio, keep it video, what would you do? What would you say? So that we can also be influencers in our own small way and make a positive impact.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the, I guess, two pieces which connect with each other. The first is be as real, authentic and honest as you can be, because I think that's what people connect with. In terms of the practical question, so all of these clips, in fact, all the clips of everything you've seen and 10 or 11,000 others, they're all on openplanet.org. You can download them onto your phone, onto your laptop, whatever, and then they work on. And they just go into your folder, into your photos folder or images folder, and you can just use any of the sort of softwares that come with social media platforms or video editors or anything like that, just to drag and drop them in. And the thing I would say is, don't start by being overly complicated. I don't think it's always the super polished quality that always works. There are times when you need that, and I mean, we specialize in some of that. There's moments when you need that, but quite often what you need is an authentic story that really connects with people and a genuine motivation for doing it. I think one of the things that can hopefully change with storytelling going forward is there is so much more peer-to-peer. We heard in the first session about how people, who you hear from is who you trust. The people, it's that shared trust that you get between people. So you'll be speaking to somebody in your audience who has some form of relationship with you, whether that's a digital one or a real life one, and therefore has an element of trust from you. So I would say stay as authentic as possible, where you can use the images to illustrate them. They're currently quite simple to use. The next version of this, when we can raise a little funds, if any tech funders are out there, is to put is anyone out there? Is to put another layer on it where you can drag and drop it so much more simply. But even now, you can put it into any like Instagram video editor or anything like that, and it will work fine. Thank you. Have you got any?
Yeah, I think what you said is like spot on. You are the trusted voice in your community. I think there's a shift that happened after COVID-19, where we were kind of seeing celebrity advocacy campaigns and influencing, which I still think is important. Let's use the influence. But I remember driving through a village in Mozambique when we were running a program, and seeing a huge billboard poster of Pharrell talking about water in the middle of Mozambique. And I just thought, man, this is strange. This is weird. So yeah, I think it's gotten much more simple. People, they want the real. It's about you talking to your community of people around what the experience is for you, and you know how that will resonate. What are the touch points? What to say? How to package from a communications perspective the message so that it actually hits. So don't make it complicated. We all have a phone. Pull out your phone. TikTok has transformed, how storytelling gets done and who's put on. So yeah, to your point, keep it simple and keep it real. Yeah.
100%. So I think, how are we doing for time? I think we've got time for the one more question. Yeah.
I'll be really quick.
No, that's okay.
My name is Olivia Karp, and I'm from Canada. And I just want to say the films you've had of South Africa really touched me, so thank you so much for sharing. So my question is this: what tangible action or change have you found from the films you've made, like the one in South Africa or like other ones you've collaborated in general? I'm just curious, has it led to like fundraisers? Has it led to on the ground, action, stuff like that?
Your best place to start, yeah.
So the first tangible change, and this is a really difficult thing when you spoke about storytelling and advocacy in terms of what can be measured. So, and again, reach is great, but what does reach actually tell you beyond likes? What we were able to see as we were kind of tracking is the kind of questions we started seeing people asking of their local community members, their local leaders, what was coming up on the comments in our threads, which allowed for a new, different conversation with the communities themselves, those who had seen the films, those who might not have even known or understood the impact that the floodings had in KwaZulu-Natal, and what does this mean to me living in a fancy area within Sandton. And so that was the first thing that we see. I think the quality of engagement and the quality of questioning, which again, as an academic myself, is key. Are we thinking about things? Is this sitting at the forefront in our minds, particularly when you are dealing with communities that are dealing with a plethora of other issues, right? Where am I going to find a job? Where am I going to secure housing and healthcare? Why is this an issue to me? So for us, in terms of that engagement piece and the knock-on effects that we were seeing off the back of that was really the level of discussion, the community engagements that we were able to see in the months prior, particularly to that first film being shot in some of these communities that didn't have any questions for us before. Like, we would show the film, crickets, and we would leave. So, yeah, I think that's the first thing that comes to my head.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry we're out of time, but I would say please use Open Planet. It's free. Experiment. Speak to your audience in your way, in whatever suits you, and please share it, because we'd love to see more of them. But also check out the amazing work that Creative Development does. There's some you've seen here. There's loads more, and they do the most amazing stuff. So thank you very much.